我哋下晝今日嘅國際研討會嘅下晝嘅第一節咧，就馬上開始啦。咁我哋喺呢一節嘅時間咧，會係由而家開始咧，係到咧係4:05嘅。咁啊，當中咧會有2場咧主題演講，同埋咧1場咧係分組討論。咁咧係好快咧，我哋就開始咗我哋個研討會嘅第5場嘅主題演講。咁我哋好高興咧請到咧係遠道由澳洲而嚟嘅 Sir Green 爵士咧，係幫我哋咧係做一個咧係英語嘅演講，咁亦同樣啦，我哋係好榮幸、好高興咧請到咧香港教育學院人文學院院長兼中國文學講座教授陳國球教授，為我哋咧做呢一個咧係演講嘅主持。咁我將時間交俾陳教授。
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very glad to be here to introduce to you the speakers of the session 5 of these keynote speeches. My name is Leonard Chen, 陳國球. I come from Hong Kong IED, 香港教育學院. Now, the honourable speaker today for this session is the chairman of the trustees of the Tasmanian Museums and Art Gallery. For the sake of convenience, the following introduction will be in Cantonese. 嘉健靈爵士 Sir Guy Green 係自從1995年到2003年咧，佢係出任呢個澳洲塔斯曼尼亞省嘅總督。佢咧係澳洲在任最長嘅省總督。喺在任期間咧，就每當澳洲總督休假嘅時候咧，就嘉健靈爵士咧就係會肩擔起澳洲總督嘅職務。嘉健靈爵士咧畢業於塔斯曼尼亞大學嘅法律系。由於佢喺塔省法律界咧表現非常之傑出，所以咧就喺1973年就30歲嘅時候咧就被委任為終審法院嘅首席法官，締造咗該省嘅司法界嘅歷史。喺佢在職嘅22年期間呢，佢又曾經獲委任為塔斯曼尼亞大學嘅校監，就係由1985年至到1995年㗎。咁佢咧就為母校就出咗好多力。嘉健靈爵士咧就喺1982年呢就獲頒授大英帝國爵士勳銜，1994年就獲頒澳大利亞勳章，公元2000年就獲皇家維多利亞勳銜，2001年就獲得100週年紀念獎章。嘉健靈爵士熱心公益，喺2003年退任總督之後呢，仍然專注為塔省嘅市民服務。佢而家呢係塔省博物館藝術館嘅理事會主席，同埋島上10日節嘅管理委員會主席。對於推動塔省嘅文化藝術活動咧，就不遺餘力㗎。嘉健靈爵士佢嘅興趣好廣泛，著述好豐富，範圍啦包括咗文化、歷史、法律、地理、科技等等。佢嘅演講呢，就每為社會人士津津樂道，因為佢嘅觀點呢，就好多創建新意。佢善於從不同嘅角度咧去分析論題，絕無陳腔濫調。近年呢，嘉健靈爵士對中國藝術文化產生咗濃厚嘅興趣，就更加大力咁樣推動塔省同埋香港嘅文化交流活動。咁以上咧就係大會提供嘅資料，我相信咧就嘉健靈爵士咧佢嘅貢獻咧就有好多方面㗎，咁呢度只係一部分嚟嘅啫。咁佢今日咧就同大家做嘅報告嗰個課題咧就係叫做粵劇任劍輝與文化遺產嘅概念。The titles of Sir Guy's presentation will be Cantonese Opera, Yam Kim Fai and the concepts of cultural heritage. Now, may I invite Sir Guy to give his presentation.
Well, thank you very much. I'm honoured to have been asked to speak at this seminar. Tasmania and Hong Kong already have some strong cultural ties. Professor Wong is a valued patron of and respected colleague in the Tasmania Museum and Art Gallery. and the Tasmania Museum and Art Gallery as well a few years ago presented an exhibition of the calligraphy and paintings of Professor Ya Chung-yi, which has led to enduring relationships since then, particularly with the Petit École Institute in the University of Hong Kong. So it's particularly gratifying and pleasing today to add another strand to that web of our cultural relationship through this seminar. This seminar is a scholarly gathering, but it is also a celebration of Cantonese opera and a celebration of what has been poetically described as the beautiful and fascinating page in the history of Cantonese opera, which was Madame Yam Kim Fai's legacy to it. Now, in this talk, I would like to develop the idea that one of the most appropriate and productive forms which such a celebration can take is to promote the study of Cantonese opera and increase awareness of its significance as an important part of the cultural heritage, which should be preserved and passed on to future generations. Now, let me start with a brief exploration of the concept of cultural heritage. This is not a mere semantic exercise. How we define the concept of cultural heritage informs our judgment of the value we should attach to it and what resources we should invest in maintaining and promoting it. Now, in years gone by, the words culture and cultural heritage were more circumscribed than they are now, and the concept of an international cultural heritage didn't exist at all. Reflecting its etymological roots, the word culture used to be confined to what might now be called high art. So the 19th century English poet Matthew Arnold defined culture as the best knowledge, the best ideas, and the best that has been known and said in the world, while the 20th century English poet and essayist T.S. Eliot, in his Notes Towards a Definition of Culture, took a similarly limited and rather elitist view of what intellectual or artistic works qualified as culture. However, in recent decades there have been three developments. The scope of what is regarded as a society's culture has widened. The criteria of what qualifies as culture have become less arbitrary than those which are implicit in the definitions adopted by people like Arnold and Eliot. And the concept of a society's cultural heritage has developed from it being confined to particular celebrated works from the past to it being seen as a continuum extending down through the generations to the present day and into the future. And that's the important distinction. A significant milestone was the adoption by UNESCO in 1972 of what has become known as the World Heritage Convention. And amongst other things, this convention is concerned with the recognition and protection of physical objects and buildings which are seen as part of the world's cultural heritage. Now, since the adoption of that convention, the scope of the concept of cultural heritage has expanded even further. It has become recognised in the words of a UNESCO report that, and I quote, cultural heritage does not end at monuments and collections of objects. It also includes traditions or living expressions inherited from our ancestors and passed on to our descendants, such as oral traditions, performing arts, social practices, rituals, and festive events. That enlargement of the scope of the concept of cultural heritage was reflected in a series of UNESCO instruments, which culminated in the adoption of the UNESCO Convention for the Safeguarding of the Intangible Cultural Heritage, which came into force in 2006. And as you know, in 2009, Cantonese opera was inscribed on the representative list of the intangible cultural heritage of humanity created by that convention. And alongside those developments, a great deal of academic material has been published and debate has been taking place in sociological and art circles about the concept of intangible cultural heritage. But despite the frequency and the confidence with which the phrase cultural heritage is now used, I submit that it is not yet a fully mature concept. Now, I shall explore 4 issues, both generally and with particular reference to Cantonese opera and Madame Yam Kim Fai. The first issue is intangible cultural heritage qualitatively different from physical cultural heritage? Now, at first sight, it seems obvious that those manifestations of a culture which are physical and permanent, such as, say, Stonehenge or the Great Wall of China or something, and those which are intangible, such as the traditions and practices of Shakespearean theatre or Cantonese opera, should be placed in qualitatively different categories. It seems obvious, but it's not. It's arguable that drawing such a distinction, in fact, creates a false dichotomy. A building, object, or site only derives its significance from its purpose and its history and what value a given community attaches to it or has attached to it in the past. Without the life which is breathed into it by its intangible qualities, a monument is just a piece of stone. Of course, some components of the physical, material, cultural heritage of a society do have emotional impact and aesthetic appeal, even though the viewer knows nothing about their intangible cultural associations. But that involves viewing monuments and objects in the same way as one views spectacular natural features, which, although having emotional impact and aesthetic appeal, cannot be said to be a part of a society's cultural heritage. My thesis is that all physical cultural heritage is dependent for its significance and its validation on intangible cultural heritage. But the converse is not the case. While intangible cultural heritage is enhanced by physical objects associated with it, it exists independently of them. An example of the interaction between the two is provided by the permanent Cantonese opera exhibition in the Hong Kong Heritage Museum. The displays and the pictures and the posters and costumes and manuscripts and other objects comprising that wonderful exhibition provide a highly evocative conspectus of the recent history of Cantonese opera, which certainly increases visitors' understanding and enriches their appreciation of Cantonese opera. But although those objects have intrinsic interest and appeal, their real significance is derived from the material provided as part of the exhibition, which brings to life the meaning and the history and other intangible qualities of the objects. Now, the conclusion that physical and intangible cultural heritage cannot be equiparated is not of merely academic significance. It has ramifications for the issues to which I'll return in a moment, of how we value our cultural heritage and how we should allocate resources to support different forms of it. I turn to the second issue in this exploration of the concept of cultural heritage, which has been expressed, and I quote, as the tensions that exist between the idea of heritage as fixed, immutable, and focused on the past, and that of a mutable heritage centred very much on the present. Now, arguments about the nature of cultural heritage which focus on the past and emphasise the importance of maintaining cultural heritage in some fixed traditional form have to confront a problem at the threshold. Cultural heritage comprises the whole corpus of memories, experiences, skills and knowledge which has come down to us from previous generations. But that corpus has been augmented and developed by every succeeding generation. So the question arises, by what criteria do we select which particular generation's ideas and practices represent the one truly authentic form which expressions of that heritage should take today? Why should one particular cross-section of social and cultural history be given a privileged status and remain frozen and unchanged for all time? For example, should female roles in Shakespeare's plays only be performed by males because that was the practice in Elizabethan times? Indeed, as some scholars controversially argue, is the very concept of cultural authenticity an illusion? Now, I don't propose exploring the ramifications of this issue for the whole field of intangible cultural heritage, but I do suggest that there are compelling reasons why at least the performing arts should be regarded as a form of cultural heritage which is mutable and dynamic as opposed to immutable and fixed on the past. It's inherent in the very definition of the phrase that the performing arts are not a static thing like a painting or a building. They are a dynamic interaction between audiences on the one hand and actors and musicians and dancers and everyone else involved in the creation and production of an event on the other. No matter how prescriptive or formulaic oral traditions, scripts, music or choreography might be, each performance on the stage and each new film is unique. And over time, all forms of the performing arts are subject to reinterpretation, natural evolution or deliberate development. And those characteristics are epitomised by Cantonese opera. While Cantonese opera is characterised as a traditional art form, that's not incompatible with it also being a living and dynamic art form. In the words of one scholar, Professor Bell Jung, Cantonese opera is a living opera in the sense that despite a long tradition, it's ready to change and adapt itself to the current tastes of the audience. In saying that, the author was drawing on his research and experiences of Cantonese opera in the mid-1970s. During the 35 years which have passed since then, Cantonese opera has undergone further development, which I think illustrate his point about it being dynamic. I turn to the third issue: should cultural heritage be viewed and evaluated from a global, national or community perspective? An issue sometimes characterised and expressed as whether we should take a cosmopolitan as opposed to a local view of cultural heritage. Now, this issue is inherent in the intangible cultural heritage itself, the convention I mean, which places the community in the paramount position in its definition. But the very fact that it's an international convention also shows that the global community is claiming to have an interest in the intangible cultural heritage of communities as well. Whatever standing or interest global entities or countries might have or claim to have, the reality is that overwhelmingly cultural heritage is created by and passed down through the members of communities defined by a shared language or a shared involvement in a given form of cultural activity. I think my time's running.
Yeah, it's almost up.
Okay, well, I think perhaps I'll quickly move to the final issue of what are the criteria for allocating resources towards the preservation and promotion of different parts of a society's cultural heritage. In particular, when resources are limited, should priority be given to supporting the preservation of monuments and objects on the one hand, or supporting the promotion and performance of an art form like Cantonese opera on the other? Now, ideally, both should be supported, and I don't want to promote unseemly competition between them. But when that's not possible, what are the criteria? And there are three that I want to particularly emphasise. Unlike physical cultural heritage, intangible cultural heritage is not a static thing frozen in the past. It's always refreshing itself. While iconic monuments can be inspiring symbols for a society, their impact is not comparable to that of intangible cultural heritage. And finally, the creativity which brings into being a work which becomes part of the physical cultural heritage is exhausted upon the completion of the work. In contrast, intangible cultural heritage such as Cantonese opera is, in the words of Bell Jung, not a static display but a product of a continual creative process. Now let me conclude by just making a brief reference to Yam Kim Fai herself. She demonstrated, like Cantonese opera generally, a capacity to adapt and evolve her performances through times of great technical and social change. But she also has another suite of special qualities to which I can personally attest. I was introduced to Cantonese opera and Madam Yam Kim Fai a few years ago, and since then I've viewed a number of her films and many excerpts from her performances. Now, I'm not an expert in Cantonese opera. I'm not an expert in Western opera. So, of course, I don't present the impact which my introduction to the art of Yam Kim Fai had upon me as having any weight in itself. But I do present my personal experience as a case study which reveals one of her most profound attributes as a performer. Although I couldn't understand the words, and I only had a limited understanding of the conventions of Cantonese opera, I was still able to appreciate Yam Kim Fai's wonderful qualities. The sheer power of her presence, her attractive personality, her comedic spirit, her timing, the way she moves, her magnificent voice, and above all her expressiveness, her extraordinary capacity to convey so much just by her facial expressions and those incredible eyes of hers. I was also struck by her naturalness. She was performing in a traditional art form, and yet while it was highly disciplined, I didn't have any impression of her performance being stylised or formal. Now, I think that it's a tribute to the genius of Yam Kim Fai that she was able to transcend differences of language and culture and speak directly to an untutored Western viewer like me in that way. So let me conclude by returning to the theme with which I began this talk and suggest that everything I've said shows why it's right that the centenary of Yam Kim Fai should be recognised, why it's right that Cantonese opera should occupy an honoured place in the representative list of the intangible cultural heritage of humanity, and why it's right that we celebrate Yam Kim Fai and Cantonese opera by the holding of this seminar. Dorje.
Sorry that I have made it a little bit rushed for Sir Guy, but I believe everyone here is enlightened by his speech. Well, so why don't we give him a big hand again?
Thank you. Thank you.
So now I hand over to the MC. Thanks.
好，咁啊，多謝晒陳國球教授同埋咧係嘉健靈爵士咁啦。